Winter, 1946. A British cruiser steams out of a South Atlantic port, and aboard the ship she is escorting are several hundred German sailors she is carrying home to Germany. These men were taken off a warship that this same cruiser had helped send to the bottom 7 years earlier. The victor is carrying the defeated home, and she is doing it calmly, like routine work. To understand how that became possible, you have to go back 7 years, to a morning these German sailors would remember for the rest of their lives. The 13th of December, 1939. The mouth of the River Plate, on the border between Argentina and Uruguay, just past 6 in the morning. On the bridge of the light cruiser Ajax, lookouts report smoke on the horizon. It has just been taken for a merchant steamer, and one of the squadron's ships has already turned toward it for a routine check. Within minutes, that smoke will resolve into 2 turrets of 11-inch guns, and every man on the bridge will understand that they are looking at a ship that can kill any one of them with a single salvo. By the end of the action, 72 British sailors will be dead or dying of their wounds, most of them aboard a single ship that will take the brunt of it. But before the sun sets over the plate, any of the 3 British cruisers could share their fate. The squadron had come hunting a German raider with the advantage, 3 cruisers against 1. On paper, fair arithmetic. At sea, that one German ship carried heavier guns than all 3 British cruisers combined, and reached twice as far as they could answer. 3 lightweights had come to corner a heavyweight, whose arms were longer and whose every punch was a knockout. And yet, by the evening of the 17th of December, the heavyweight lay on the bottom, while the light cruiser, with 2 turrets and part of her mast shot away, lived on through the whole war, from the South Atlantic to the cliffs of Normandy, and outlasted nearly everyone who fired at her that day. A ship that was never meant to win outlived a ship that was never meant to lose. And the man who lost that battle would, on his last night, do something that says more about that war than any victory. But none of this starts with the battle. It starts with what this cruiser did not have. Ajax was laid down on the 7th of February, 1933, at the Vickers Armstrong's yard at Barrow-in-Furness, launched on the 1st of March of 34, and commissioned on the 12th of April, 35. She was a Leander-class light cruiser, the kind of ship the Royal Navy built between the wars not for a fleet action, but for the work nobody writes songs about, patrolling the Empire's trade routes, escorting convoys, chasing raiders where the nearest base was weeks away. 613 feet long, around 10,000 tons, 760 men aboard. Her main armament was 8 6-inch guns in 4 turrets, 152 millimeters. A shell weighing around 50 kilograms, range about 14 miles. Against a merchant steamer or a surface submarine, more than enough. Against an armored ship of the line, they were stones thrown at a moving tank. Her armor matched her guns. A thin belt covered the machinery and the magazines against splinters and against the shells of other light ships, ships like Ajax herself. Anything heavier passed through it like tin. Her designers knew that and never tried to build a frontline ship. They built a workhorse, fast, seaworthy, with an enormous range, able to stay at sea for months far from any shore. And here is what that philosophy did to the men inside her. A range of nearly 6,000 miles looks handsome in a reference book. In practice, it meant 700 men living for weeks in a steel box with no shore beyond the hull. And every cubic meter an engineer gave to fuel, he took away from the crew. Hammocks slung in 3 tiers over the same tables they ate at. Boiler room crews standing watch in heat that wouldn't let the sweat dry on their skin. And a knowledge worn into everyone who understood his ship. The plating would stop nothing serious. What kept them alive was speed, and a captain who knew not to turn his side into a punch. 32 knots was not a line to be proud of in a manual. It was all the armor Ajax had. And 6 years later, off Crete, that armor would turn out to be useless against an enemy that came not from the sea, but from the sky. Crete was still far off. For now, in September of 39, the workhorse was steaming toward the battle she'd be remembered for, and steaming toward it without knowing. The ship already knew these waters. She knew them almost too well. By the start of the war, Ajax knew the South Atlantic better than home waters. Twice she had circled the whole South American continent, once counterclockwise, once clockwise, in company with Exeter. In January of 39, still peacetime, an earthquake destroyed the Chilean city of Concepcion. Ajax and Exeter were among the first to arrive. The cruiser's crew landed supplies, cleared rubble, helped people who had nothing left. The mayor thanked the sailors, and years later the Chilean government awarded medals to the surviving veterans for that help. The ship the whole world would come to know as a fighting machine first made her name by arriving after a catastrophe, not by causing one. By the very end of this story, she will return to that role in a way no one could have guessed. Ajax was commanded by Captain Charles Woodhouse, an officer who had spent his career in gunnery, who knew his ship's guns down to the last screw and knew their limits just as clearly. Within months, he would watch half of those guns fall silent in a single second. On the 3rd of September, 39, the war came. The declaration found the fleet at its stations, and Ajax joined Force G, Commodore Henry Harwood's South Atlantic Squadron. Alongside her steamed the heavy cruiser Exeter, the light cruiser Achilles of the New Zealand Division, and the heavy cruiser Cumberland, who by the decisive day would be stuck refitting in the Falklands and would arrive too late. The first weeks of the war were invisible, thankless work. The ships swept the trade routes, stopped vessels, checked papers. In September, Ajax intercepted 2 German steamers slipping home. In October, she stopped a ship flying Swedish colors and calling herself Annona. A boarding party went across and, under the false papers, found the German liner Cap Norde, creeping home from Brazil under a borrowed name. By evening, a prize crew was already taking her north. That was the real life of a light cruiser. Weeks of monotonous patrol, wet watches on the bridge, false alarms. On paper, such ships secured command of the sea lanes. In life, it meant 700 men staring for weeks at an empty horizon, ready for a moment that might never come, or might come a minute after you looked away. That moment was already on its way to them, across the whole South Atlantic. The German raider had put to sea back in August, before the war, and had been cleared to begin hunting in late September. By December, she had sent 9 ships to the bottom, around 50,000 tons in all. On the 2nd of December, she sank the British steamer Doric Star, but the Doric Star got a distress signal into the air before she went down. The next morning, another ship sent a similar signal, 170 miles away. On the 3rd of December, Harwood stood in the chart room of Ajax with those 2 signals, doing the thing that wins and loses wars. He was guessing. The thickest trade routes of the South Atlantic converged at the mouth of the River Plate. The whole flow of grain, meat, and cargo out of Argentina and Uruguay ran through there. Harwood bet the raider would come exactly here and named the day, the 13th of December. He drew his ships into that point and waited. He guessed right, to within a day. And he knew what almost no one else on his ships knew, steaming out to their stations that morning. If the calculation held, what was coming was not another prize under a false flag, but a ship that would kill any of his cruisers before it could fire back. Harwood led 700 men toward that ship with his eyes open. The only question left was which of them would live to see the sunset. The ship they were waiting for was Admiral Graf Spee. The Germans rated her as a panzer ship, an armored ship. The world called such ships pocket battleships. 12,000 tons against Ajax's 10. On paper, a small difference. But it was never about the tonnage. It was about what those tons carried. 6 guns of 11-inch caliber, 283 millimeters, in 2 turrets. A shell of nearly 300 kilograms, with twice the reach of Ajax's 6-inch guns. Plus a battery of 6-inch guns as her secondary armament, meaning that on top of her knockout caliber, the German carried as many light barrels as the British ship's entire main battery. Her captain was Hans Langsdorff. Remember that name. We will come back to this man at the end, and his last night will overturn everything you are about to think about this victory. The arithmetic of the battle was simple and terrible. Graf Spee could hit the British long before they reached their own range. If she kept her distance, she could shoot all 3 cruisers to pieces one by one and stay untouchable. Langsdorff did not keep his distance.
When the British ships came up over the horizon just after 6, he took them for destroyers, or for a light convoy escort to be crushed quickly and closed in. The man with the longest reach in the fight stepped into the clinch himself and handed the British the one thing that could save them, the short range where their light guns began to bite. Harwood's plan was built on exactly that. Split the force. Exeter comes in from one side, Ajax and Achilles from the other, forcing the German to divide his fire between targets. And drive in at full speed to cross the killing zone, where only Graf Spee's guns reached, as fast as possible. At 18 minutes past 6, Graf Spee opened fire from nearly 20,000 meters. At first Langsdorff hesitated. His turrets worked under separate control, and he shifted target several times. Then he concentrated the full weight of both main turrets on Exeter, the largest of the 3. What that did to Exeter, I'll give you up front.
61 men killed and mortally wounded, almost all the British losses of the day. A burning ship going down by the bow, listing, firing one surviving turret until she lost her power to flooding. And what brought her to it was the Germans' 3rd salvo. It fell square on Exeter and wiped out the entire starboard torpedo crew at once. Other shells riddled the superstructure, cut the communications, tore apart the spotter aircraft being readied for launch. The wreck was heaved over the side. Her turrets were knocked out one by one. All of it in the first few minutes. While Graf Spee tore into Exeter, Ajax and Achilles closed from the other side and hammered. Their 6-inch guns pierced nothing vital. One by one, those hits meant little. Together they blinded the German and ground down his men, shell after shell knocking out rangefinders, instruments, antennas, the crews at the open stations. The fire of 2 light cruisers nagged at him so badly that Langsdorff split his main battery again, shifting some barrels onto them, and unwittingly lifted part of the killing weight off the dying Exeter. The light guns pierced no armor, but they were saving lives on the other ship by drawing the fire onto themselves. At 37 minutes past 6, Ajax launched her Seafox float plane off the catapult, Lieutenant Lewin at the controls, to spot the fall of shot from above. A signaling delay meant the first report from the air came only 17 minutes later. But from that moment, the British saw their own splashes from on high, and their fire grew sharper. And still the fight was uneven, and the truth of that came back hard. At 25 minutes past 7, an 11-inch shell from Graf Spee found Ajax. A single hit put X turret out of action and jammed Y turret. Both after turrets, half the main battery, gone at once. At the after stations, the shell killed men in the same second. A little later, another hit carried away part of the mainmast. Woodhouse, a gunnery man to the bone, who knew those guns by heart, watched half his firepower go silent in a moment, and could do nothing. By 7:40, it had turned genuinely bad. Exeter was leaving the fight. Ajax had lost 2 turrets and reported around 20% of her ammunition left. Achilles had taken splinter damage, and Graf Spee, despite dozens of hits, was still running at full speed, every main gun still firing accurately. Harwood broke off the day action. Ajax and Achilles turned east under a smokescreen, opened the range, and settled onto the German's tail. Not to run. To shadow him and wait for night, when speed, maneuver, and torpedoes would give them the chance the daylight gun duel never could. And then Langsdorff did the second thing that decided everything.
He had won the day action outright. Exeter knocked out, Ajax half disarmed, both light cruisers running low on shells, and himself barely slowed. Ahead of him lay the open ocean. He could break away from the battered pursuers and go, to distant waters, to a refit, home. Instead, he turned for the nearest refuge, neutral Montevideo in Uruguay. He brought a ship that had won its battle straight into a trap with no second way out. And what drove him there was not a British shell, but a light cruiser that had not pierced his armor once all day. If you're finding it interesting how a ship that lost the gun duel still finished off the enemy who outmatched her, subscribing helps the channel and means you won't miss the next one. There was no battle at Montevideo. There was a war of nerves, and the British won it almost without firing. Langsdorff took the damaged Graf Spee into the harbor, to patch the holes, to bury the dead, around 36 men. Under international law, a belligerent warship could stay in a neutral port only a few days. And outside, beyond the line of territorial waters, waited Ajax and Achilles. Battered, half their guns gone, not budging a mile. The British were bluffing. Through diplomatic and intelligence channels, they put about that heavy reinforcements were gathering at the mouth of the Plate. A carrier, a battlecruiser, ships Graf Spee could not survive. In fact, the reinforcements were still far off. Outside Montevideo stood two battered light cruisers and the heavy cruiser Cumberland come up to join them. Langsdorff believed in the Phantom Squadron over the horizon. He faced a choice no victor of a day action should have. Break out to sea, where he thought a superior fleet was waiting, and almost certainly lose his ship and crew. Or stay and be interned, handing his ship over to the Uruguayans intact. He could go through with neither. On the 17th of December, Graf Spee steamed slowly out of the harbor in front of thousands of citizens packed along the shore and the rooftops. Radio carried it live around the world. The ship moved out to the outer roadstead and stopped. The crew came off onto tugs. And then the pocket battleship blew herself apart on her own charges, without a fight, so as not to hand the ship to the enemy or throw lives away for nothing. Langsdorff saved nearly his entire crew, at the cost of the ship that had just won its battle. The light cruiser that by every table in the world could not beat a pocket battleship had taken part in her death without piercing her armor once. She did not break the steel. She broke the calculation of the man on the bridge. That was enough. On the 23rd of February, 1940, the crews of Ajax and Exeter, along with 6 merchant captains freed from captivity, marched through London. King George VI met them in person. The ship went in to refit at Chatham and, among other things, took on the device that would change the second half of her war: radar. The cruiser whose defense had been speed and the sharpness of eyes on the bridge was gaining sight that saw in darkness and fog. The war was only beginning. And soon it showed Ajax that it held something worse in reserve than a pocket battleship. In August of 40, patched and rearmed, Ajax sailed for the Mediterranean. France had fallen, Italy had entered the war, and cruisers were needed there. That autumn she shone again in her own element, a night action off Cape Passero, where she sank 2 Italian torpedo boats. Night, speed, surprise, a close-range fight against light forces. Everything she was built for. Here she was the predator. And then came Crete. Crete showed the price paid by the men inside the machine for a miscalculation somewhere above them. In May of 41, after the defense of Greece collapsed, the Royal Navy evacuated the remnants of the Allied troops first to Crete, then, under constant attack from the air, off Crete itself. The sky belonged to the Luftwaffe. Ju-87 dive bombers and Ju-88 bombers hung over the fleet all day. The ships had no sky of their own, not one fighter overhead to cover the evacuation. The price was monstrous. In those days, German aircraft sank 3 British cruisers and 6 destroyers. Ajax was with Rear Admiral Rawlings's force, lifting off the garrison. On the way to the island, near misses damaged her so badly she had to turn back to Alexandria. And that same night, off Heraklion, the convoy taking off the garrison was struck on the return passage. Destroyers lost, cruisers badly hit, more than 400 men killed, hundreds wounded and taken prisoner. Around 600 evacuated soldiers were killed or captured after they had seemingly already been saved. None of this went on the recruiting posters. A ship that had outlived a pocket battleship, a ship with guns and new radar, was nearly helpless against an aircraft with a single bomb. And the truth of Crete was hard. The fleet was sent to hold an island over which it had not a single fighter of its own. The decision was made where sailors' lives weren't being counted, and the bill was paid by the men lifting troops off the beaches under the scream of dive bombers, doing their work in a position created for them far from any deck. Ajax survived Crete. A great many did not. After that came the grinding Mediterranean service, convoys to Malta through a solid zone of attack from the air and from the deep, supply runs to besieged Tobruk, and the war would not let the ship go. In January of 43, off the Algerian coast, a German 1,000-pound bomb tore into Ajax and knocked out a boiler room. The cruiser was towed to Gibraltar, then repaired across the ocean at the American base at Norfolk. She came back into service again and again, patched, rearmed, with new radar and new anti-aircraft guns. The war had one more large job for her, and it was waiting off the coast of France. By June of 44, Ajax had come a road several biographies long. She had begun the war as a raider hunter in the South Atlantic. She had been through the night battles of the Mediterranean, the hell of Crete, the siege of Tobruk, the Malta convoys. And now she stood off the coast of Normandy in the invasion force, with the same 6-inch guns that had failed to pierce a pocket battleship, now trained on the concrete of the Atlantic Wall. Her target on the morning of the 6th of June was the German battery at Longues-sur-Mer. 455mm naval guns in concrete casemates on the cliffs between Omaha and Gold Beaches. Range about 8 miles, enough to reach both the Americans at Omaha and the British at Gold. The casemate walls were 2 meters of reinforced concrete.
The night before, they had been bombed from the air with hundreds of tons of bombs, and they had held. At 37 minutes past 5 in the morning, Ajax opened fire. The gun duel lasted for hours. The German gunners, a garrison of around 180 men, answered. Over the day, the battery fired more than 100 rounds and forced a British headquarters ship to withdraw. But Ajax pounded the casemates from the sea, shell after shell, around 114 6-inch rounds in all, and did what, for a light cruiser firing from a rolling deck at a pinpoint concrete target ashore, bordered on the impossible. She put shells straight through the casemate embrasures. A direct hit destroyed the gun in number 4 casemate. Near misses knocked out the rest. The accuracy was such that the marks of those 6-inch shells in the concrete survive to this day. Visitors at Longues-sur-Mer still stand in front of them, studying the work of the gunners of a ship that had made her name off the River Plate across the ocean 5 years before. And here is what all of it turns into, if you look closely. Ajax's 6-inch guns across the whole war never once pierced the armor of a major warship. They couldn't. Yet those weak guns knocked out the Italian torpedo boats off Pesaro, gutted the German battery on the Normandy cliffs, covered the landings, supported the troops ashore with a storm of accurate fire. The weapon useless against the one enemy for whom the cruiser supposedly had her finest hour turned out to be lethal against every other enemy of that war. The light cruiser was not weak. She had simply been built for a different war than the one the pocket battleship legend assigned to her. And in the real war, she worked from the first day to the last, at the Plate, in the Mediterranean, off Crete, off Normandy, in southern France in Operation Dragoon, in the Aegean during the Allied return to Athens. She came through the whole war, and she outlived it. And the longest echo of this story belongs to neither Ajax nor her captain. It belongs to the man who lost. Come back to Hans Langsdorff, captain of Graf Spee, the man Ajax helped corner at Montevideo. Langsdorff fought his war by rules that, by 39, were already considered old-fashioned. Sinking British merchant ships, he methodically took off their crews before sending the ships down. Across his whole hunt in the South Atlantic, which sank 9 ships, not one captured sailor died. He held those prisoners aboard the supply ship Altmark, and later a British destroyer would free them, storming into a Norwegian fjord.
But they lived to see that day because the man who sank their ships made it a point of honor to keep them alive. When his own ship was cornered at Montevideo, Langsdorff chose not a heroic death for his crew in a hopeless breakout, but scuttling to save his people. He saved almost the entire crew. 2 days later, in a hotel room in Buenos Aires, he shot himself. And one detail tells you everything about him. He lay down not on the Nazi flag he had fought under. He lay down on the old naval ensign of Germany, the flag of the navy he had grown up in. In the letter he left, he took the whole responsibility for the ship's fate on himself, so the blame would not fall on his men. That closes the whole arc. The story began with a paradox. The weak ship outlived the strong one. Behind it hides a second paradox, quieter and deeper. Langsdorff fought as a man of rules, in a war that was fast abolishing every rule. He was taking crews off sinking ships in the very year others were learning to sink everything, without warning, without distinction. He chose his men's lives over his ship, and his own death over their blame. He belonged to the old navy, the one whose flag he laid beneath himself on his last night. The ship of the new age outplayed his machine. The man was outplayed by time itself. And the last thing, the thing no screenwriter would invent. After the war, the surviving German sailors of Graf Spee, stranded for years in South America, had to be brought home. The ship assigned to escort the repatriation liner was Ajax. The one who helped destroy Graf Spee, in the end, brought her crew home. The cruiser that had begun her peacetime life as a rescuer after an earthquake in Chile, ended her war doing the same thing she began with, carrying the living home. Only now they were the men of the enemy who had once nearly killed her. The light cruiser that could not pierce a pocket battleship's armor outlived the battleship and her captain and the war itself. She never won by strength. She never had it for that. She survived. And she carried someone else's survivors home, back to their living. If this story was worth your time, leave a like and subscribe. There are more ships ahead whose legends turn out to be nothing like what they seem.